So, my name's Andrew Gall. I'm the leader of the Entrepreneurial Finance Hub at the Big Innovation Centre. The purpose of the Entrepreneurial Finance Hub is to increase the financial support for high growth, high intangible based scale up businesses. The background research that's been done by the Big Innovation Centre, by the Intellectual Property Office, by government research organisations have identified that the rate of intangible assets and the growth of companies is now so important to the economy, but there is still a big gap in the finance going into these scale-up businesses. So what we've done is develop a platform and a process which helps companies to gain funding. It enables high-growth businesses to be recognised, to have trusted finance providers through a standardised approach. So we're used to seeing the typical J-curve for a startup business where initially there will be investments, the business then would start gaining revenues but still be unprofitable, and then as the revenues grow it would get into a profitable stage, and if it can scale faster the steepness of that curve would be much higher, and that's the fantastic opportunity for scale-up businesses. But we do recognise that it's not just one organisation that ends up being successful. For each successful one, there will be multiples of ones that do not succeed, would go on without reaching their growth potential, or would fail. We don't necessarily see that as a finance gap. We see it as much as being a risk and validation gap for those scale-up businesses to recognise what assets they've got and to be able to identify the opportunities to grow. So one of the key images and thoughts that we've got within the Entrepreneurial Finance Hub is of the scale-up iceberg. So we see at the tip of the iceberg there are successful scale-up businesses which are achieving a good plan and manage to get finance, usually in places like Silicon Valley. What we're trying to address at the Entrepreneurial Finance Hub is catalysing the organisations which are on the waterline. So how can we reduce the density of the iceberg to lift some of those organisations into gaining funding and into being scaled up? We also see the opportunity for organisations which are unfunded, for them to be able to learn, be able to enhance their proposition over time, and for the next proposition to be more successful, hence lowering cost and speeding these opportunities to go to market.
The Entrepreneurial Finance Hub process is meant to expose more information about intangible assets in order to communicate their value to potential funders and improve funding decisions. The first stage of the process is actually identifying what intangible assets the company has. That includes registered IP such as patents and trademarks, but it also includes other intangible assets that the firm might have not known previously that they even possessed. The second stage of the process is the enhancement stage. So how does the intangible asset profile actually contribute value to the business plan, and how does it lead directly to revenue down the line? Also, how do you protect that intangible asset going forward? Third stage is valuation, so doing both a quantitative valuation of the value of the IP and the intangible assets to the company, as well as the qualitative valuation in terms of what competitive advantage it conveys to the company. The fourth stage is both signposting and matchmaking for finance for the company, based specifically on what their intangible asset and growth stage, what kind of mix of financing and funders might be relevant to that particular company. There's also an insurance element, so patent litigation and protecting against infringement for the company, as well as patent underwriting and intangible asset underwriting the value for loans.
My name is Martin Brassel. I'm one of the authors of the Banking on IP report, which was produced recently to look at the challenges that entrepreneurial businesses face in finding funding, particularly based around the use of their intellectual assets. For the knowledge economy to prosper, it's really important that businesses are able to leverage and use the things that they most need to spend money on and which sit at the heart of the value that they create. So we've been delighted to support this first phase of the Entrepreneurial Finance Hub with a range of online tools. And these are really designed to help companies to work out what their full range of intangible assets is, some key issues that they might have in protecting and maintaining them, and also get an indication of what they might be worth. Valuation of intangible assets and intellectual property is a tricky challenge because its value always depends on how well the individual business is doing. There are three main methods that are used. One is to look at cost, one is to look at market comparators, and the other one is to look at the level of income that the IP is generating. All of them have their different purposes. In this particular instance, because we're talking about the funding context, we're particularly interested in what the value contribution of the IP may be in the future. So we use an income-based method, which we developed working with Grant Thornton. So after the companies have been through their particular online processes, what we've also done is taken a look at their business plan and done a comparison to try and understand how far these intangible assets and intellectual property are integral to their growth plans. And I think the value that the companies have got out of this has been quite considerable. The key thing that they have to understand is whether their IP is in a position to help them raise funding, whether that's grant funding, equity funding, or debt funding. And generally speaking, the further along the scale-up curve that a company gets, the more likely it is to be able to use debt as opposed to equity funding. So we've been particularly on the lookout for the kind of assets like contracts and so forth, which are evidencing the fact that the business is going to generate more value in the future.
In a month or so, we had 15 companies register with us, and we're able to do intangible asset inventories and valuations, and from there we were able to do an analysis on about 7 of them, and I had 5 of them present at our showcase event in March.
As well, although there are some limitations on that.
So we've been introduced to the Entrepreneurial Finance Hub. We found it a very useful tool. It's very structured and gives us a great way of evaluating where we are in terms of IP and what we need to do in the future to close our IP gaps.
So going through the process with the Big Innovation Centre Entrepreneurial Finance Hub was a very useful exercise because it's highlighted to us areas where we need to strengthen our intellectual property, and also it's enabled us to look at the way we do business. In fact, one of the areas that we were asked to look at was licensing, and whilst we had thought about that in the past, we had been unable to look at potential revenue streams in anything but an outline manner, and this methodology has enabled us to look at that in a far deeper way, and actually to pin some value on that potential licensing.
So I think the process was really interesting. What it did was definitely force some of the questions to the fore. It sharpened our minds, I can say, to really think about what is the value of our IP, how can we protect it, how we should be thinking about it, what we should prioritise. As a startup, it's sometimes wood for trees, and
with the business plan, we hadn't actually valued IP, but understanding now that IP could potentially be 2/3 of the value, I think going forward it starts a conversation with VCs and business angels to raise the money we need to manufacture and go further.
So, very pleased to be invited to come along today to the Entrepreneurial Finance Hub. Very great insight into how you measure the IP value in a business, because it's something that's an intangible asset, but does, especially in our type of business, have a huge value.
So we've been working with you on your development of the EFH to try and improve the access to finance for small businesses, high growth businesses, IP rich, and improve the ability of financiers to engage with them and get money out the door to them. Fantastic to connect with these businesses and speak to them about their journey from kind of equity to bank debt and understand how they're using the tool, and how I think it's really helpful in presenting a concise summary of their assets to the bank so that we can take a more informed lending decision. I think generally we're not good at valuing intangibles. We understand their importance, but if the EFH can be used to show that importance and how it feeds through to the scale-up's performance, then that would be fantastic. Yeah, it's a really positive relationship, and it's really helping us understand the value of intangibles, especially, and how we can fill a need that these businesses have.
So the opportunity from the Entrepreneurial Finance Hub is to add value to the scale-up businesses and to funders. So with the scale-up businesses being able to get more of them, to grow faster, to increase their economic activity, jobs and sales. and along that route of growing, be able to find finance in different forms. So in terms of angel investors, being more secure about the intangible assets that these organisations have got, for venture capital organisations to be able to fund the likely organisations that are going to grow, and be able to hold on to the value of the intangible assets as they grow through the various phases. For alternative finance opportunities, for alternative debt, alternative equity, invoice factoring, for them also to be able to fund these scale-up businesses, and also for traditional and retail banks to be able to move into an earlier phase of the scale-up businesses' growth opportunities, to be able to finance when there is revenue, to be able to service the debt, be able to and supported by intangible assets which are adding value, which we can identify as part of the EFH. Then there's better opportunities for the scale-up organisations and for the funders here.